Hi, this is part 2 of single subject research designs. I realized in the last video I didn't really distinguish this very clearly, is that within single subject designs, there's 3 different kinds. There's exploratory, descriptive, and explanatory. Exploratory is where it's the ones that we just described at the end of the last video, where you're just kind of gathering kind of basic information where you can start to craft hypotheses. I think that's the right word. You can tell this is like snow day brain. We're making it work. So this is where you're just kind of like gathering the information and starting to show that there might be possible causality, there might be a possible benefit to this intervention, but you have such low level of knowledge around it. You're not controlling all of the external variables that might be influencing the outcomes, but you're starting to build a foundation of knowledge to show that this might in fact work for somebody down the road. So it's like the lowest level of knowledge kind of continuum where you're just kind of starting to explore the effectiveness of different interventions on behaviors. So to recap, there's the A, B, and then BB1 and BC, which is where you do a baseline, no intervention, no baseline, intervention, intervention and a variation of intervention, and then 2 different interventions. All right, so that explains exploratory designs. So we go into descriptive. So this is now moving up the continuum of knowledge. So this is where you have probably more knowledge of the client, the presenting problem, and you're looking to find some more causality and correlation between A's and B's and interventions and the effectiveness of the intervention. And so you can see it's a little bit more sophisticated. So you start with the A, which we've determined from the last slide, is the baseline phase. So the collecting data on the target problem without having any intervention started, followed by the intervention. And so again, if you're thinking about what the graph looks like, you are having this in different quadrants where you start A and then you designate that A as ended, and it's the start now of the B data where the intervention has been implemented. It is important to note that the A-B design cannot answer explanatory questions. So having that for sure 1,100,000,000% correlation between the intervention and the improvement of the symptoms. But it can indicate that there is a strong relationship growing between the intervention and the change. And so if you have, again, a client who's experiencing, like they're coming to therapy and they are really having a difficult time with forming positive relationships, and so the reports of their self-esteem around just in general is low, you might take this baseline of how they have like a self-esteem inventory survey, get 3+ markers of that, and then you might refer them to a social skills group where they learn how to have productive social interactions, and then administer that same self-esteem survey throughout the time that they're taking the intervention to see if by the time the intervention is ended, their self-esteem scores have changed for the better. So that would be like an A-B design. Now, it may be, again, the group that did help them, and if you're seeing improvement in scores, you might have a hunch that there is a strong relationship between going to skills group and improving your social relationships and self-esteem. But they might have gotten a new job during that time. They might have actually like formed a friend independent of the social skills group, and they have attributed that to feeling better about themselves. They might have lost weight, so they feel better about themselves. So we can't say for certain that the intervention did cure or fix solely those issues, but there again is that good relationship. So similarly, there is an ABC or ABCD or ABCDEFG design where you again have the baseline, so getting data without any sort of intervention, implementing intervention B, and then ending B, and then starting C. And so you then obviously every letter you add is a different unique intervention that you take specific data for. So again, it would have the exact same descriptor that you can't necessarily answer an explanatory question with this design, but you can indicate relationships. So this is graphic to kind of like reiterate some of the graphically displaying the data. We have explanatory, which is what we're going to discuss next. And I put the graphs on here because this one gets a little bit more complicated because it's on the higher level of the knowledge continuum, because now you're really trying to show some direct causality and correlation. And so it's kind of helpful to see a little bit of the graphing. But anyways, explanatory designs are reversal in multiple baseline. And so reversal is just showing that there is multiple repetition of stages. And so that's going to show if you get consistent data over time with the repetition of phases and stages and interventions, then you can start to say, yes, we have a really solid hunch that there is some connection to this. So, here we go. ABA or ABAB design, you're establishing causality because you're showing that the same intervention is shown to work twice with the same client, and you have baseline data to show the extent of the problem was there with no intervention. Now, you can see with the ABA, you don't have the implementation of the intervention again, but the theory would be that the client's functionality would return to the baseline in the absence of B. So it's showing that for the period of time B worked, but then when it was gone, their symptoms tanked again. Now you have to be very, very mindful of the ethics around this. If pulling a intervention is knowingly going to make your client tank or not do well, is that ethical to put a client through? So you have to make sure that their safety is still being monitored and cared for and respected. It might be, the intervention might be an 8-week social skills group or an 8-week trauma group. And so there's going to be a natural ending to the intervention. And so that is a time where this design might work well, because there's a natural end, and then you can see if now does staying in that group really help, those types of things. So there's potential for harm, but you're not necessarily pulling something for the sake of researching it. It had a natural end. BAB is just the flip of the ABA. It's where you start the intervention. So it might be like the client I referred to in the last video who came in with suicidal ideations. They showed some improvement, and so you ended the intervention. It might have been going to intensive group therapy, like they got referred to as and started group therapy, and group ended. And then you notice as soon as they were not in the group anymore, their symptomology worsened again, so they went straight back to the group to help promote their safety. It's important to note that if a client has shown to improve twice after receiving the same intervention, it does likely warrant that you can use this intervention again with a different client. So you're kind of establishing some of that causality. It's explaining that it is effective in treating the target problem, and so it should be safe to do for another client who might be experiencing a similar problem. The multiple baseline, it's funny, when I first hear this term, I think of like it being kind of like an ABA where you're looking at a client's baseline more than once, but it's actually referring to having multiple clients that have a baseline. And so you might have 3 clients on your caseload who might be experiencing anxiety as well. And so you're going to implement the same meditation intervention. So having them meditate 10 minutes a day to see if that helps improve their anxiety. So now you have 3 different clients who have 3 unique baselines and 3 unique B phases to look at. And that can, again, help if you're seeing that multiple baselines are being improved with this intervention, that then you might be able to start drawing some causality that it's effective in treating that target problem. I'm skipping back to this retrospective baseline because it's important to know that sometimes you might need to go back and kind of pull a baseline from a client because it does get a little tricky to me because are we trying to establish a baseline so we can have an ABA study versus a BAB? But there is benefits at times. But the best retrospective baselines are those that do not depend on a client's memory because you're looking at, a client's frame of reference. They might be seeing things differently than was really there. So like, let's say a client got admitted to a psych hospital. You might be able to pull some data from them about what their baseline was during that stay before they got referred to your services. And so that can be useful in establishing a baseline if a different agency had similar interventions or similar data collection methods to establish that way versus asking a client how their anxiety levels were 5 months ago. Now, depending on the target problem, you might be able to construct it from archival data. Like I was saying, you might have it from a different agency they were working with. There just might be some random information from somewhere that you can establish, but it's not always the case. It is acceptable to establish a baseline of 0, for instance, if there have been no occurrences. And so if you were working with a client and you were trying to get them to go to AA to address their drinking, you could have a baseline of 0 if they've never attended a meeting before. So naturally that baseline is going to be 0 because there's been no occurrences of AA attendance prior to whatever you're doing. So you can have a baseline of 0 when appropriate. And there are some occasions when a baseline cannot be established, it's not usable or is inappropriate, and that usually goes back to client safety. If you don't have the time to establish a baseline without information because the client will be put at risk, you do not put your client safety over the sake of research and getting this beautiful graph because something could happen and hold you liable, and it's just not ethical. So there you have it. Those are single subject designs: exploratory, descriptive, explanatory. They go on the continuum of how much knowledge and how specific you want to be. Super useful for the clinical practice, and it helps really validate the interventions you're doing or trying to figure out if you're wasting you and your client's time by trying to do something that's not actually helping. So my crispy nuggets, the summaries are, you're probably going to do something like this in some days, so make sure you're familiar with it. The more specific you can be around a target problem, the better, because it gives you the ability to pull more concrete data. And also, these are really helpful if a client does start to show improvement, is being able to reflect back to your client being like, hey, 5 months ago, you were scoring at the top of the scale where your anxiety was so high. And now look at the hard work you've put in has paid off because you are now scoring down here. So it can be a real motivator when used appropriately. Clients can get really discouraged sometimes if they don't see total cessation of an issue or a concern or whatever their target problem is. And so reflecting on the progress made by the graphs that you've created can help kind of keep a client invested and demonstrate and kind of using that strength-based mindset of hey, you're doing the hard work. You might not feel it, you might not see it, but here I can give you a visual representation of hard data to show that it is making a difference and you're doing the hard work to get there. So there you have it.